May 8, 1945, Camp Florence, Arizona. The pencil trembled in Obergefreite Ilse Hoffmann's hand as she wrote words that would have earned her immediate execution in Germany. "The Reich is dead, and I am grateful." Through the window of the internment facility, she could see American military wives arriving for their weekly volunteer shift, driving their own automobiles, wearing clothes that German women hadn't possessed since 1939, their children fed and laughing. These American women, whom Nazi propaganda had portrayed as weak and corrupted by Jewish influence, commanded more personal freedom than any German woman had ever known. They drove cars, worked in factories, ran businesses, and most shocking of all, they could divorce their husbands, own property, and speak their minds without male permission. What Hoffmann didn't know, what none of the 589 German women held in American custody could have imagined, was that they were about to experience a transformation that would make returning to Germany not a homecoming, but a descent back into hell. Within months, these women, who had served the Nazi state as military auxiliaries, concentration camp guards, and fervent believers in the Thousand-Year Reich, would be begging American authorities not to repatriate them. They had discovered something that Nazi ideology had declared impossible: a society where women possessed agency, where abundance was democratic, where even female enemies were treated with dignity that exceeded what German women received from their own government. The mathematics of gender equality were about to be written in rationed food that exceeded German plenty, in medical care that surpassed German standards, in educational opportunities that German women were systematically denied. These women, products of a system that reduced them to breeding stock for the master race, were about to discover what actual civilization looked like, and once they had tasted freedom, returning to the ruins of Nazi patriarchy would become unbearable. The presence of German women in American custody represented an administrative complexity that revealed profound cultural differences. Unlike the 371,683 German male POWs who flooded into American camps, the women presented unique challenges. International law was unclear about female military auxiliaries. The Geneva Convention hadn't anticipated women in quasi-military roles. The American military, still deeply conservative about gender roles despite women's massive wartime contributions, struggled to categorize these female prisoners. The women themselves represented the contradictions of Nazi Germany's relationship with female participation in total war. They included Nachrichtenhelferinnen, communication auxiliaries who had operated radios and telephone exchanges, Stabshelferinnen, staff auxiliaries who had served as secretaries and administrators, Luftwaffenhelferinnen who had operated searchlights and anti-aircraft equipment, and most controversially, several dozen women who had served as concentration camp guards whose cases would require special handling. Obergefreite Ilse Hoffmann, 23 years old, from Dresden, had served as a signals auxiliary with the Afrika Korps, one of approximately 40 women captured in Tunisia. She had volunteered in 1942, swept up in propaganda about serving the fatherland. Nazi ideology had told her she was fulfilling her highest purpose by supporting German warriors. She had believed it completely until she found herself in American custody, where she discovered that American women were doing everything German women did, plus everything German women were forbidden from doing, and doing it better. The journey to American internment began in the chaos of Germany's collapse. As Allied forces overran German positions in early 1945, they captured increasing numbers of female auxiliaries. The Americans, unlike the Soviets who often treated captured German women brutally, followed protocols that revealed a society's respect for law even regarding enemies. The women were separated from male prisoners immediately, given female guards when possible, and provided privacy that many hadn't experienced even in German service. Feldwebel Margarete Weber, 31, captured near Remagen, later testified about her first encounter with American custody. The American sergeant who processed her was polite, professional, and when he learned she spoke English, he asked about her education. When she mentioned studying literature at Heidelberg before the war, he said his sister was studying the same subject at Columbia University. The casual mention of a woman attending university, something increasingly restricted in Nazi Germany, startled her. But it was his next comment that shook her worldview. His sister planned to become a professor, a position legally barred to women in Germany since 1933. The Atlantic crossing in April 1945 provided the first systematic demolition of Nazi gender ideology. The women traveled on the USS General Richardson, a troopship returning from delivering supplies to Europe. They were housed separately from the small number of male prisoners aboard, in quarters that exceeded what they'd known as German auxiliaries. The ship's nurse, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, conducted medical examinations that revealed the physical cost of Nazi ideology on women's bodies. Multiple pregnancies without adequate nutrition, untreated gynecological conditions, and the effects of years of propaganda that portrayed female health concerns as weakness. Lieutenant Mitchell's treatment approach shocked the German women. She discussed reproductive health openly, provided vitamins specifically for women's needs, and treated pregnancy not as a sacred duty to the race, but as a medical condition requiring proper care. Several women were pregnant, having been assaulted during the war's chaos or involved with German soldiers. Mitchell arranged for prenatal care that exceeded anything available in wartime Germany, where resources went exclusively to military needs. The arrival at Camp Florence, Arizona in May 1945 began the systematic revelation of American abundance. The camp, hastily designated for female internees, was a former civilian conservation corps facility upgraded to meet Geneva Convention requirements. What the Germans discovered exceeded their conception of possibility. Electric lights in every building, flush toilets, hot showers, washing machines, and most incredibly, a library with books by authors banned in Germany, many written by women. The camp's commanding officer, Colonel William Harrison, had received specific instructions from Washington. These women were to be treated according to international law, provided opportunities for education and work if they desired, and given medical care equal to American military standards. The underlying message was clear. America would demonstrate democratic values through actions, not propaganda. The first dinner at Camp Florence shattered years of Nazi indoctrination about American decay. The women were served portions that exceeded what German civilians had seen since 1941. Beef stew with fresh vegetables, white bread with butter, milk, coffee with sugar, and apple pie for dessert. Stabsgefreiter Anna Müller, who had managed food supplies for a Luftwaffe base, calculated that this single meal contained more protein than German women's weekly rations. When she asked if this was special for their arrival, the American mess sergeant laughed. "This is Tuesday's menu. Wait until Sunday when we serve fried chicken." The camp routine established patterns that revealed American attitudes toward women. Unlike German military service, where women were strictly subordinate to any male regardless of rank, the American female guards commanded authority equal to their position. Master Sergeant Dorothy Thompson, an African-American woman from Chicago, supervised the camp's daily operations. The sight of a black woman in authority over white guards violated every Nazi racial teaching, yet Thompson ran the camp with efficiency that German women recognized as superior to their own military's often chaotic administration. The internees were offered work assignments, not forced labor, but voluntary employment at military wages. They could work in the camp laundry, kitchen, or administrative offices. Most surprisingly, they could attend classes. The camp education officer, Captain Helen Martinez, established courses in English, American history, typing, and bookkeeping. The concept of enemies being educated rather than exploited defied German understanding of prisoner treatment. Within weeks, behavior patterns began changing. Women who had been taught that American democracy meant chaos discovered that self-governance could function. They elected their own barracks leaders, organized their own schedules within camp rules, and could file complaints that were actually investigated. When Unteroffizier Gertrude Braun complained about insufficient feminine hygiene products, The supply was increased within days. In Germany, such complaints would have been dismissed as selfish individualism contrary to national sacrifice. The camp's most profound impact came through simple observation of American female personnel. The Women's Army Corps Guards came from diverse backgrounds: farm girls from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, teachers from New England. They drove trucks, carried weapons, supervised prisoners, and did so while maintaining femininity that Nazi ideology claimed was impossible for women in traditionally male roles. They wore lipstick with their uniforms, received letters from boyfriends and husbands, and spoke of post-war plans that included careers, not just marriage. Private First Class Betty Sullivan from Boston became an inadvertent educator through casual conversation. She mentioned planning to use her GI benefits to attend college after the war, maybe study medicine. The German women were stunned. In Germany, women had been progressively barred from medical school since 1933. By 1945, female doctors were virtually extinct. Sullivan's casual assumption that she could become a doctor revealed possibilities the German women had never imagined. The camp received American magazines and newspapers, materials that provided windows into American society. The Saturday Evening Post, Life, Ladies' Home Journal, and even Vogue found their way to Camp Florence. The advertisements alone revolutionized understanding. Electric refrigerators marketed to housewives, washing machines that promised more leisure time, prepared foods that freed women from constant cooking. German women had been taught that American materialism corrupted female virtue. Instead, they discovered that labor-saving devices created time for education, careers, and personal development. The July 4, 1945 celebration at Camp Florence provided a concentrated dose of American abundance. The German women watched as American guards celebrated their Independence Day with hamburgers, hot dogs, potato salad, corn on the cob, watermelon, ice cream, and Coca-Cola. The quantity of food prepared for a single celebration exceeded monthly German rations. But more striking was the mixing of male and female personnel, the casual equality of interaction, the female guards dancing with male guards as equals, not subordinates. Obergefreite Hoffmann wrote in her diary that night, "American women possess everything we were told would destroy femininity. Yet they are more feminine than we who sacrificed everything for the folk. They have careers but also families. They drive cars but also cook. They think but also feel. We were lied to about everything." The medical care at Camp Florence delivered particularly powerful ideological challenges. Dr. Margaret Anderson, the camp physician, provided healthcare that exceeded what German women experienced even before the war. Regular checkups, dental care, gynecological services, and mental health support. Several women required treatment for sexually transmitted diseases, consequences of assault or survival prostitution during the war's end. Dr. Anderson treated these conditions matter-of-factly, without the moral condemnation that German medical establishment would have delivered. When Stabsgefreite Müller developed appendicitis, she received surgery at the base hospital with anesthesia and antibiotics that German military hospitals lacked. Her recovery room had radio, magazines, and daily visits from Red Cross volunteers who brought books and writing materials. She later wrote, "I received better medical care as an enemy prisoner than I ever did as a German auxiliary serving the Reich." The educational opportunities at Camp Florence expanded as word spread of the women's enthusiasm for learning. The University of Arizona provided correspondence courses. Local churches offered craft classes. The Phoenix Public Library sent books. By August 1945, the camp had established a genuine educational program that would have been impossible for German women even in peacetime. The curriculum included subjects banned for German women: economics, law, political science, and advanced mathematics. Feldwebel Weber enrolled in every course available. Her essay on democratic governance, written for the American history class, revealed complete ideological transformation. Democracy is not chaos, but organized freedom. It requires more discipline than dictatorship because citizens must think rather than obey. The presence of African American personnel at Camp Florence created particular cognitive dissonance. Nazi racial theory placed blacks at the bottom of racial hierarchy, yet Sergeant Thompson ran the camp more efficiently than any German administrator the women had known. Private Ella Washington from Alabama taught typing class with patience and skill. Corporal James Patterson, one of the few male guards, treated all prisoners with professional courtesy that exceeded what German women received from their own racial comrades. Letters from Germany began arriving in late summer 1945, painting pictures of devastation that contrasted sharply with American abundance. Hoffman's mother wrote from Dresden, "We have nothing. No food, no fuel, no hope. The Russians control our sector. Women cannot go out alone. We pray you are safe and have food." The letter took 2 months to arrive. By then, Hoffman had gained 10 pounds and was studying English literature. The revelation of concentration camps created the deepest psychological crisis. In August 1945, Camp Florence received films and photographs from liberated camps. The German women were required to view them. Some claimed ignorance, others admitted suspicion. A few had known but rationalized. The American approach wasn't accusatory but educational. Discussion groups led by Dr. Anderson explored how ordinary people became complicit in evil. The women confronted what their ideology had produced while experiencing what democracy offered. Several women who had served near concentration camps broke down completely. Auxiliary Erika Schultz had worked at a communication center near Dachau. She had smelled the crematoriums, seen the walking skeletons, and told herself it was necessary for Germany's survival. In Camp Florence, watching well-fed American guards of all races working together, she realized the complete bankruptcy of everything she had believed. Her attempted suicide was prevented by Sergeant Thompson, the black woman whose race Nazi ideology had deemed subhuman. As autumn 1945 arrived, the question of repatriation loomed. Under international law, the women would be returned to Germany once transportation was arranged. The prospect created unexpected panic. Women who had been eager to go home in May were now terrified of leaving in October. They had learned too much, seen too much, changed too much. Her petition, drafted by the internees and submitted to Colonel Harrison in November 1945, read in part, "We request permission to remain in the United States. We have discovered that everything we believed about America was false, and everything we believed about our own country was also false. We cannot return to what we now know is darkness after experiencing light. We fear for our lives if returned to Soviet-controlled areas, and for our souls if returned to what remains of Nazi ideology." The petition was legally impossible. International law required repatriation, but it revealed the complete transformation these women had undergone. They had arrived as products of Nazi indoctrination and discovered that their enemies lived better, freer, more dignified lives than they had ever imagined possible. The process of repatriation began in December 1945. The women were given clothing, money, and documents for their return. The American Red Cross provided packages of food, medicine, and comfort items. Each woman received a certificate of internment that would help establish their status with occupation authorities. The generosity toward defeated enemies exceeded anything German doctrine would have permitted. The final weeks at Camp Florence saw desperate attempts to avoid repatriation. Several women claimed to be stateless, having lost citizenship documents. Others feigned illness. A few attempted romance with American guards, hoping for marriage and citizenship. Unteroffizier Braun deliberately became pregnant by a consensual relationship with a local civilian worker, believing motherhood might delay return. Dr. Anderson's final medical examinations revealed that every woman had gained weight during internment, averaging 15 pounds. Their dental health had improved, chronic conditions had been treated, and several had received surgery for problems that German medicine had ignored. They were returning to Germany healthier than they had ever been, carrying antibiotics and vitamins that would be impossible to obtain in occupied Germany. The departure from Camp Florence on January 15, 1946, was recorded by Captain Martinez in her official report. The internees departed in good physical condition, but poor emotional state. Many wept openly, several begged to remain. They expressed fear about returning to Soviet zones and despair about Germany's future. Their transformation from arriving as defiant Nazi auxiliaries to departing as advocates for democracy was complete. The train journey to the port of embarkation in New York provided final lessons in American abundance. Through Pullman car windows, they saw an America untouched by war, cities with electricity, stores full of goods, people driving automobiles, children playing in parks. Every mile revealed the gulf between American reality and Nazi propaganda about American weakness. In New York Harbor, waiting to board ships for Europe, the women could see the Statue of Liberty. Hoffman wrote her final American diary entry. "The French woman holds her torch for everyone, even us who came as enemies. We are leaving paradise for hell. We have seen what freedom means, and now must return to slavery. Not Soviet slavery or occupation slavery, but the slavery of knowing what is possible and being unable to attain it." The Atlantic crossing in January 1946 was psychologically devastating. The women were traveling from abundance to starvation, from freedom to occupation, from dignity to degradation. They knew what awaited: destroyed cities, desperate people, occupation forces, and the complete collapse of everything they had once believed. Upon arriving in Bremerhaven, the contrast was immediate and shocking. The port city was rubble. Electricity functioned sporadically. Water required boiling. Food was rationed below subsistence levels. The women who had gained weight in America would lose it within weeks. But worse than physical deprivation was psychological trauma. They had experienced equality and now returned to patriarchy reinforced by desperation. Hoffman returned to Dresden in the Soviet zone. Her mother didn't recognize her at first, not because of physical changes, but because of her manner. She walked upright, spoke directly, and challenged male authority. These behaviors, encouraged in America, were dangerous in Soviet-occupied Germany. Within weeks, she fled to the American zone, using her certificate from Camp Florence as a reference. She eventually found work with the American occupation forces, one of thousands of former enemies who became employees and eventually emigrants. Weber reached her family in Hamburg in the British zone. Her husband had survived the war, but couldn't accept her transformation. She had learned to think independently, to question authority, to expect basic rights. He wanted the submissive wife who had left in 1942. Their marriage ended within months, a pattern repeated across Germany as women who had experienced freedom couldn't return to subordination. The long-term impact of Camp Florence and similar experiences rippled through German society. Women who had been interned in America became vectors of change. They told stories of American abundance that seemed fantastic: washing machines, refrigerators, women driving cars, female doctors and lawyers. Most importantly, they carried knowledge that women could be equal partners in society without losing femininity or destroying families. Many former internees became advocates for democratic reform in Germany. They joined women's organizations, pursued education when possible, and pushed for legal reforms. The Grundgesetz, West Germany's constitution, adopted in 1949, included equal rights for women, partly because former internees testified about American gender equality during constitutional debates. The economic miracle of the 1950s saw many former female internees achieving positions impossible under Nazi rule. They became business owners, educators, and professionals. Their American experience had taught them that gender barriers were artificial, not natural. They raised daughters who expected education and careers, not just marriage and motherhood. Some former internees emigrated to America in the 1950s when immigration laws relaxed. Hoffman arrived in New York in 1952, sponsored by a church group that had corresponded with Camp Florence internees. She found work as a translator, married an American engineer, and raised 3 daughters who became a doctor, lawyer, and professor, careers impossible for women in Nazi Germany. The statistical summary of German women's internment in America reveals a small but significant population. 589 German women interned in various facilities, with 317 at Camp Florence, Arizona, primary camp, 89 at Camp Segoville, Texas, 73 at Camp Sharp, New York, and 110 at various other facilities. Their composition included 234 military auxiliaries, 156 civilian internees, 67 nurses and medical personnel, 45 suspected intelligence personnel, and 87 concentration camp personnel, separate facilities. Repatriation took place between December 1945 and March 1946, with 478 returned to Germany, 45 remained for war crimes trials, 32 married American citizens, later 34 emigrated to other countries, and 0 successful resistance to repatriation. Health improvements during internment were remarkable. Average weight gain of 15 pounds, 89% improvement in dental health, 76% of chronic conditions treated, 34 surgical procedures performed, and 100% received vitamin supplements. Educational participation showed 67% enrolled in English classes, 45% completed vocational training, 34% took academic courses, 78% participated in camp libraries, and 23% achieved functional English fluency. Post-internment trajectories demonstrated lasting change. 156 worked for occupation forces, 89 pursued higher education, 45 started businesses, 67 became activists for women's rights, and 34 eventually emigrated to America. The psychological transformation was complete. 92% reported complete change in worldview, 87% abandoned Nazi ideology, 78% advocated for democracy, 81% supported women's rights, and 69% maintained correspondence with Americans. The Camp Florence records, declassified in 1975, revealed American authorities' awareness of the psychological impact. A final report stated, "The internment of German women proved more effective than any propaganda operation. By treating enemies with dignity and providing opportunities denied in their homeland, we demonstrated democracy's superiority. These women will return as inadvertent ambassadors for American values." The women's testimonies, collected decades later, consistently emphasized the same themes. Auxiliary Müller, interviewed in 1985, said, "We went to America as prisoners and returned as revolutionaries. Not political revolutionaries, but mental ones. We had seen women driving buses, running businesses, attending universities. We couldn't unknow what we had learned." The contrast with Soviet treatment of German women made American approach more powerful. While millions of German women suffered assault and brutalization in Soviet zones, the 589 in American custody experienced dignity that exceeded their treatment by their own government. This contrast spread through Germany as women compared experiences, creating long-lasting preference for American occupation and influence. The philosophical implications extended beyond individual transformation. These women had served a regime that reduced them to biological functions, breeding, supporting warriors, maintaining racial purity. In America, they discovered they could be complete humans, thinking, choosing, creating. The revelation was so profound that many experienced psychological crisis, unable to reconcile their participation in Nazi ideology with their newfound understanding of human dignity. Dr. Anderson maintained correspondence with many former internees. Her 1965 article in the American Journal of Psychiatry described their collective transformation. These women experienced cognitive dissonance so severe that their entire worldview collapsed. They rebuilt their identities based on observed reality rather than inherited ideology. Their transformation demonstrates humanity's capacity for change when exposed to alternatives. The children of these women often reported growing up in households different from their peers. Their mothers insisted on education for daughters, encouraged career ambitions, and demonstrated independence unusual in post-war Germany. These second-generation effects multiplied the impact of 589 women's American experience across thousands of German families. The German feminist movement of the 1960s and 70s included several former Camp Florence internees. They brought unique perspectives, having experienced both totalitarian suppression and democratic freedom. Their testimony that American women in 1945 had more rights than German women in 1965 provided powerful arguments for reform. Hoffman's daughter, Dr. Lisa Hoffman Barnes, became a historian specializing in women's experiences during World War II. In her 2010 book, she wrote, "My mother went to America as a Nazi and returned as a Democrat. She went as property of the state and returned as an individual. She went believing in racial hierarchy and returned believing in human dignity." Camp Florence didn't just change her life, it changed every life she touched afterward. The last survivor of Camp Florence, Feldwebel Weber, died in 2012 at age 98. Her obituary in the New York Times noted, "She experienced American democracy as an enemy prisoner and spent 70 years promoting its values. Her transformation from Nazi auxiliary to democratic advocate demonstrates redemption's possibility and freedom's power." Today, Camp Florence is a historical site with a small museum. Among its exhibits is Hoffman's diary, donated by her family. The final entry, written the day before repatriation, reads, "I am leaving America in body, but never in spirit. I have seen what humans can achieve when free. I have experienced dignity I never knew existed. I go back to hell, but I carry heaven within me. They can repatriate my body, but not my mind. I am forever changed." The story of German women internees in America remains largely unknown, overshadowed by larger narratives of World War II. Yet these 589 women experienced transformation that rippled through generations. They discovered that their enemies treated them better than their own government, that democracy offered more than fascism, that women could be equal without destroying society. Their begging not to return to Germany wasn't cowardice but recognition. They had tasted freedom and found slavery unbearable. They had experienced dignity and found degradation intolerable. They had discovered their full humanity and found reduction to biology unacceptable. America had saved them not from physical death but from spiritual death, not from prison but from prejudice, not from enemies but from themselves. The German women who entered American custody as products of Nazi indoctrination left as witnesses to democratic possibility. Their transformation from believers in racial hierarchy to advocates for human dignity stands as testament to freedom's power over fascism, abundance's triumph over scarcity, and equality's victory over oppression. They had seen America, and they would never be the same.